I used to think the dead stayed buried. That once someone was gone, they belonged to the silence of the grave, leaving only memories and photographs to haunt the living. For 27 years, that's what I believed about my mother. Her name was Vivian Blake, and according to my father, she died the night I was born. Complications, he said. Too much blood loss. He told me once, when I was 9, that she had looked into my face one last time and smiled before slipping away. I carried that image like a sacred wound, replaying it whenever I felt the emptiness of growing up without a mother. My father, Marcus Blake, was all I had. He was a man of iron, tall, with a voice that bent people to his will. In our small city, his name opened doors, hushed whispers, and closed deals. He raised me with strict rules: no parties, no foolish friends, no questions about the past. I was his perfect daughter, and in return, he gave me everything money could buy. Elite schools, luxury clothes, a place at his table when his business associates came over. But beneath the polished exterior, there was always distance. He never hugged me, never told me he loved me. His affection was measured in tuition fees and expensive gifts. I told myself it was enough. That maybe this was how love looked when one parent was gone. Until the night I saw her. It was during a gala at the university where I worked as a junior researcher. My mentor, Dr. Adrian Cole, had invited me to join him and his wife, Eliza, at the annual fundraising dinner. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, women in sequined gowns, men in tailored suits. I had never felt more out of place, my rented dress clinging to me as though it knew I didn't belong in such wealth. And then I froze. Across the room, near the staircase, stood a woman. Her hair was streaked with gray, her gown simple compared to the others, but her face, God, her face was the mirror of mine. Same sharp chin, same deep-set eyes, even the same way she pressed her lips when nervous. For a moment, I thought it was a hallucination. But when her gaze swept the crowd and collided with mine, something in my chest cracked. Recognition. Pure and undeniable. I staggered back, clutching my glass. My mother was dead. She had been dead for 27 years. Yet there she was, alive, breathing, looking straight at me with eyes that burned like unanswered prayers. I wanted to scream. To run across the room and throw myself into her arms. But before I could move, a man in a black suit touched her elbow, and just like that, she turned and slipped away. I barely slept that night. My father's words rang in my ears. She died giving birth to you. She never left that hospital. But I had seen her. Alive. Real. And if she was alive, then everything I'd been told was a lie. The next morning, I confronted my father. He sat in the study, the scent of his cigar thick in the air, eyes hidden behind gold-rimmed glasses as he scrolled through reports. "You're shaking," he said without looking up. "What is it now?" I swallowed hard. I saw her. He froze. Just for a second, but I caught it. His fingers tightened around the paper, his jaw flexed. Then he leaned back, calm as ever, his eyes cold. "Who?" "Don't do that," I snapped, surprising even myself. "Don't pretend. I saw Mom last night at the university gala. She's alive. You told me she was dead, but she's not." The silence stretched. Then he chuckled, low and bitter. "Grief does strange things, Naomi. You want to believe in ghosts? Fine. But don't insult me with such foolishness. It wasn't a ghost." I shouted. My voice cracked. She looked right at me. His hand slammed the desk, making me flinch. "Vivian is dead." End of discussion. But it wasn't the end for me. Because in his anger, I had seen fear. And fear was never part of Marcus Blake's vocabulary. That night, I couldn't sit still. Every corner of the house felt suffocating, every tick of the clock like a taunt. My father's denial replayed in my head, his voice thunderous, his fists tight, but what haunted me most was that flicker of fear in his eyes. He wasn't angry because I was wrong. He was angry because I was right. I knew I couldn't let it go. For years, I'd obeyed, swallowed questions, played the perfect daughter. But if my mother was alive, then my entire life had been built on a lie. And I wasn't going to let him silence me again. I started with the gala. I pulled out the guest list the university had emailed weeks before, a bland PDF with names of donors, faculty, and sponsors. Line after line blurred together until one stopped me cold. Vivian Hale. Hale. Not Blake. I whispered the name under my breath, feeling my chest tighten. Vivian Hale. My mother. Alive. Hiding under another name. The next day, between research tasks, I ducked into the library's archives. I searched newspapers, old clippings, anything with her name. At first, nothing but generic mentions a donation here, a community event there. And then, buried in a 5-year-old article, I saw it. Local philanthropist Vivian Hale, founder of the Hale Foundation for Women and Children, has pledged a new shelter for victims of domestic abuse. My breath caught. A photo accompanied it. Blurry, grainy, but it was her. My mother, smiling gently, standing beside a group of women. So she hadn't just been alive. She'd built an entirely new life. A life without me. Why? The question gnawed at me. If she had survived, if she had walked away from Marcus, why hadn't she taken me with her? Why had she let me grow up under his shadow, believing she was dead? By the time the library closed, my hands were trembling from rage and fear. I shoved the printouts into my bag, determined to confront her. But life has a cruel way of complicating even the simplest plans. That weekend, my mentor, Dr. Cole, hosted a dinner at his home, and I attended because it would have been suspicious not to. His wife Eliza greeted me warmly, pressing a glass of wine into my hand. The house was warm, full of laughter and conversation, but I couldn't enjoy any of it. My mind kept circling back to Vivian Hale. Halfway through dinner, a voice floated across the room that made my stomach drop. Low, commanding, unmistakable. My father. Marcus Blake had arrived. I hadn't known he would be there. He was seated near the fire, surrounded by men who hung on his every word. His laughter boomed, his hand resting casually on the armrest like a king among subjects. And then I noticed something chilling. One of the men leaned close to him and muttered, "Hale's Foundation is sniffing too close. Should we handle it?" Handle it. Marcus's expression hardened. No mistakes this time. Keep her quiet. The blood drained from my face. They weren't talking about just business. They were talking about my mother. I excused myself to the restroom, my legs shaky. I locked the door and pressed my palms against the sink, staring at my reflection. If they were planning to silence her, it meant she was in danger. And if I didn't act fast, I might lose her again, this time forever. I knew what I had to do. I had to find her before he did. That night, back in my apartment, I pored over the printouts again. The Hale Foundation listed its headquarters downtown. I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say, how I would prove I was her daughter, how I would beg for answers. When morning came, I dressed simply jeans, a plain sweater, and made my way to the address. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs to the office. The glass door read Hale Foundation. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I stammered. I need to see Vivian Hale. It's urgent." The smile faded. "I'm sorry, she doesn't see walk-ins without scheduling." "Please," I whispered, desperation clawing my throat. "Tell her Naomi Blake is here." Her brows furrowed. She picked up the phone, whispered something, and after a tense minute, she nodded. "She'll see you." I followed her down a quiet hallway until she opened a door to a sunlit office. And there she was. My mother. Older now, yes. Wrinkles touched the corners of her eyes, silver streaked her hair, but it was her. And when her gaze landed on me, I saw her inhale sharply, as if the air had betrayed her. "Naomi," she breathed. The world tilted. She knew my name. "Why?" My voice cracked. "Why did you let me believe you were dead?" Her eyes glistened, but her shoulders stayed firm. "Because if Marcus knew I was alive, he would have killed me. And maybe you too." The room spun around me. My whole life had been built on secrets and half-truths, but nothing prepared me for the way she said it, not like a guess, not like an exaggeration, but like a certainty. My father wasn't just strict. He wasn't just controlling. He was dangerous. She motioned for me to sit, but my legs were too unsteady. I stayed standing, gripping the back of the chair as though it might anchor me to the floor. My mother's eyes didn't leave mine. "Naomi," she said again, softer this time. I wanted to come back for you. Every day, I dreamed of it. But Marcus. Your father. He made sure I couldn't. My voice came out sharper than I meant. You left me. You let me grow up with him, thinking you were gone. Tears slid down her face, but she didn't flinch. He threatened me. The night I left, he said if I ever tried to take you, he would bury us both. He had men, money, influence. I had nothing. I thought if I disappeared, you'd at least be safe under his roof. Safe. The word curdled in my stomach. I remembered the nights I cried myself to sleep, the punishments for tiny mistakes, the silence that echoed through the house. Safe wasn't the word I'd ever use for the life I'd lived. He made me believe you were dead, I whispered, my chest aching. He told me you died, and her shoulders sagged, guilt heavy in her eyes. And I let you believe it. I didn't want you looking for me. I couldn't risk Marcus finding out. I thought one day, when you were older, I'd explain everything. But the years passed, and the fear never left. I finally sat, my legs trembling too much to hold me. My hands shook as I pressed them against my knees. He's planning something. I heard him. He wants to silence you. She didn't look surprised. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands together. He's been trying for years. My foundation, what I built, it's the only thing keeping him from rewriting the past. If people knew how he started, how he really made his money, his empire would crumble. My chest tightened. What did he do? Her eyes darkened. What he's always done. He takes. He destroys. Families, communities. He's built everything on lies, intimidation, and blood. He never wanted me speaking out. And now, with you here, her voice broke. I should have known he wouldn't stop until he had destroyed us both. I swallowed hard, my throat raw. Then we fight back. Her head snapped toward me, startled. Naomi. No, I gripped the armrest until my nails dug into the fabric. I've spent my whole life under his shadow. I've been lied to, manipulated, controlled. But not anymore. If you have proof, anything, we can expose him. We can end this. She hesitated, her lips pressed tight, before finally nodding. I kept everything. Letters. Documents. Records of his first deals. It's all locked away. I never showed anyone because I knew what Marcus was capable of. But if you're ready, if you truly want this, we can bring him down. The words filled me with both fire and dread. For the first time, I felt the weight of choice pressing down on me. If we moved forward, there would be no turning back. That night, I drove home with my mother's words echoing in my head. Proof. Records. A chance to uncover the truth. But also danger. My father wasn't a man who let go of control easily. If he sensed I was against him, he wouldn't hesitate to destroy me too. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, replaying his threats and her confession. Somewhere between exhaustion and resolve, a thought hardened in my chest. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to end it. The following week blurred into frantic planning. My mother slipped me copies of the documents, thick files filled with damning evidence, fraudulent contracts, letters that exposed his schemes, even records of payments made to silence families he had ruined. Every page made my blood boil. But it was one letter that broke me. A single page, written in my father's sharp, impatient scrawl. If she keeps asking questions, shut her up. Permanently. The she wasn't named, but I knew. It was my mother. I slammed the folder shut, bile rising in my throat. He hadn't just wanted her gone. He had tried to erase her entirely. And suddenly, I knew the truth. If I didn't stop him now, he would erase me too. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the files spread out in front of me like a graveyard of secrets. I traced my fingers over the papers, the ink smudging faintly, as if even the words wanted to disappear. My mother's handwriting was on some of the margins, tiny notes, reminders, questions she had scribbled years ago. It made the evidence feel heavier, more personal, like every stroke of her pen had been written in fear. I had no doubt now. My father, Marcus Price, wasn't just corrupt. He was dangerous. He had built his empire on threats, lies, and stolen lives. And I was carrying proof of it in my hands. But proof was only power if you used it. I needed help, someone who could stand with me when the storm hit. The first name that came to mind was Jordan, my closest friend since college. Jordan was steady where I was impulsive, logical where I was fiery. He worked as a journalist, chasing stories that most people were too afraid to touch. If there was anyone I could trust with this, it was him. That night, I invited him over. When he walked in, his sharp eyes went straight to the pile of documents on my table. "This looks serious," he said, setting his bag down. "It is." My voice shook, but I didn't back down. "Jordan. It's about my father." His brow furrowed. "The one who died?" I let out a bitter laugh. "That's what I thought. But no. He's alive. And worse, he's not the man everyone thinks he is." For the next hour, I laid everything out: the DNA test, my mother's confession, the mansion, the overheard argument, the files she'd given me. Jordan didn't interrupt. He just listened, his face tightening with every detail. When I finished, he sat back, exhaling sharply. "Naomi. This isn't just a family secret. This is systemic. Fraud. Exploitation. Maybe even murder, if that letter means what I think it does." I nodded, my throat dry. "I can't do this alone. If I go public, Marcus will destroy me. But if we build the right case, if the truth comes out the right way, he can't stop it." Jordan leaned forward, his voice firm. "Then we do it carefully. Step by step. We gather everything. We protect you. And when the time is right, we let the world see who Marcus Price really is." His confidence steadied me, but fear still gnawed at my ribs. Because I knew Marcus. He didn't play fair. He wouldn't just watch his empire crumble, he'd burn down anyone who dared to threaten it. And I had just made myself his #1 threat. The following days blurred into a rhythm of secrecy and urgency. By day, I went to work as if nothing had changed, smiling at colleagues, nodding at meetings, pretending my world wasn't collapsing. By night, I pored over files with Jordan, cross-referencing names, contracts, bank records. The deeper we dug, the more grotesque the truth became. Entire neighborhoods had been erased because of him. Families promised compensation never saw a dime. Small business owners who resisted found themselves bankrupted overnight. And every deal, every contract, had Marcus Price's fingerprints on it. It was enough to bury him 10 times over. But I also knew one thing: he wasn't stupid. He must have sensed I was pulling away, because he started calling more often. His voice, smooth as ever, slithered through the phone. "Naomi, I feel like you're distant lately. Is something wrong? You know you can always come to me." I forced my voice steady. "I'm fine, Dad. Just busy." But every word felt like a lie lodged in my throat. One evening, I came home to find a sleek black car parked across the street. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the engine was running. My stomach dropped. I knew that car. It was one of his. I didn't go inside. I turned and walked 2 blocks before circling back through an alley, watching from a distance. The car stayed there until midnight, then finally pulled away. He was watching me. The realization chilled me to the bone. He suspected something. I called Jordan immediately. "He knows," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He's onto me." "Then we move faster," Jordan said. "But Naomi, be careful. If he's watching you, it means he's already afraid. And men like Marcus Price are most dangerous when they're cornered." His words stayed with me that night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Afraid. Dangerous. Cornered. And I knew this was no longer just about exposing Marcus. It was about surviving him. My father had lied to me my whole life. But now he knew I had the truth, and for the first time, I wasn't sure which of us would make it out alive. The next morning, I woke to the sound of knocking. Sharp. Persistent. My heart leapt into my throat. For a moment, I thought it was him, that Marcus had decided to come to my door himself. But when I opened it, relief and panic crashed together. It was Jordan. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He pushed past me before I could speak. "Naomi," he said, breathless. "We don't have time. Something happened." My hand shook as I closed the door behind him. "What? What do you mean?" He dropped his bag on the table, pulling out a folded newspaper. The headline screamed in bold letters. Local family home burns down in suspected arson. I scanned the article, and my blood ran cold. It was the Adeyemis, the family whose name had appeared in one of Marcus's old contracts. They were the ones he'd forced out of their land years ago, and we had planned to interview them for our case. Now their home was gone. "Jordan," I whispered. "This isn't a coincidence. He knows we're digging. He's silencing people." Jordan rubbed his temples. "Which means you're next, Naomi. We have to go to the authorities now before he makes a move." But I shook my head, my pulse racing. The authorities? He owns half of them. Police, politicians, he has them in his pocket. If I go to them now, the evidence will disappear before morning. Jordan stared at me, his jaw tight. "So what then? You just wait until he decides you're disposable too?" His words cut deep because I knew he was right. Marcus wasn't just capable of silencing me, he was probably already planning it. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every passing car made me jump. At 3 a.m., I sat by the window, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I kept replaying Jordan's warning in my head. "You're next." And deep down, I knew it was true. 2 days later, Marcus called me again. But this time, his voice wasn't smooth, it was sharp, commanding. "Naomi, we need to talk. Face to face. Tonight." My blood chilled. "Why?" I asked cautiously. "You know why," he said, his tone low. "I'll send a car. Don't make me come get you myself." When the line went dead, I sat frozen, my breath shallow. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to want to look me in the eye and remind me who held the power. I wanted to refuse. To slam the door in his face, to run. But a part of me understood, if I didn't go tonight, he'd take it as open war. And I wasn't ready, not yet. So when the black car pulled up, I forced myself inside. The ride felt endless. My palms sweated against the leather seat as the city lights blurred past. When we arrived at his mansion, the gates opened slowly, like jaws ready to swallow me whole. Marcus was waiting in the grand hall, dressed in another immaculate suit, his silver watch glinting under the chandelier. He smiled when he saw me, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, gave nothing away. "Naomi," he said warmly, spreading his arms. "My daughter. Sit." I didn't move. "What do you want from me?" His smile faltered just slightly. "Respect. Loyalty. I've given you my name, my blood. That should mean something." I let out a bitter laugh. "Your blood? Your name? You erased me for 25 years. You told the world I didn't exist. And now you want respect?" For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, and I saw the steel underneath the polish. "You don't understand the world, Naomi. Power demands sacrifices. Everything I did, everything I built, it was for survival. For legacy. And now, you have a choice. You can join me. Or you can become my enemy." The words hung heavy in the air, like a death sentence. I looked him straight in the eye. "Then I guess you've already made me your enemy." Something flickered in his gaze, anger, maybe even fear, but his smile returned, sharp as a blade. "Careful, daughter," he said softly. "Enemies don't live long in my world." That night, I walked out of his mansion alive. But as I stepped into the darkness, one truth rang louder than the threat in his voice: my father had just declared war on me. I stumbled out of his mansion with my heart pounding so hard it rattled in my chest. The night air felt heavier than ever. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a promise. Marcus had drawn his line, and I had crossed it. Jordan was waiting in his car a few blocks away. When I slid into the passenger seat, he didn't ask me what happened. He saw the look in my eyes and started driving. "He threatened you, didn't he?" he said finally. I nodded, my throat tight. He said enemies don't live long in his world. Jordan's hands clenched around the steering wheel. "Then we can't wait anymore, Naomi. We have to hit him before he hits you." I turned to him, fear and determination twisting together. "And how do we do that?" "He owns everything: money, influence, even fear itself. If we come at him half prepared, he'll crush us." Jordan pulled into a dark alley, cut the engine, and faced me. "Then we don't come at him alone." I've been talking to some people he's burned over the years. Families who lost land, men who lost businesses, women who lost everything when he decided they were obstacles. They're ready to talk. They're ready to fight. I stared at him, a flicker of hope breaking through the dread. And you trust them? I trust their pain, Jordan said quietly. Pain doesn't lie. Over the next week, we moved like shadows. We met in small apartments, in back rooms of cafes, in quiet corners of libraries. Every face carried scars, some visible, some buried deeper. An old man who had been forced to sell his farmland for pennies. A young mother who lost her home after Marcus's company swooped in with forged contracts. A former business partner whose career had been destroyed by fabricated scandals. They all had one thing in common. Marcus Blake had taken from them, and no one had ever believed their stories. Until now. Piece by piece, we gathered evidence, documents, recordings, testimonies. I filled notebooks with details, dates, names. Every page was a brick in the wall we were building against him. And with every brick, I felt the fire in me grow. But Marcus wasn't idle either. Late one night, as I was sorting through files, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A deep voice growled on the other end. Stop digging, Naomi. Or you'll end up in the ground with the lies you're trying to uncover. The line went dead. My hands trembled, but I refused to drop the phone. Instead, I recorded the call and saved it. Another piece of evidence. Another weapon. I thought I could stay strong, but some nights, the weight of it nearly broke me. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I was really ready to destroy my own father. If I was ready for the world to know the truth about him and by extension, about me. But then I would remember Vivian. My mother. The woman he had erased. And I would remember the way his eyes hardened when he said enemies don't live long. That was when I knew. There was no turning back. The day finally came when whispers weren't enough anymore. The evidence was ready. The people were ready. And I was ready to set fire to the empire Marcus Blake had built on lies. We hit the moment we'd been preparing for like athletes at the starting line, tense, wired, and ready to explode. Jordan had lined up our first public strike, a trusted investigative reporter at the Charlotte Ledger, Maya Ruiz, who had a reputation for going after the city's untouchables. She'd lost friends to the kinds of stories she chased, so she understood what we were about to do. She also knew how to make the truth stick. We met her in a corner booth of a coffee shop that smelled faintly of burnt espresso and old paperbacks. I remember my hands were ice cold. Jordan slid a thick manila folder across the table. Inside were the contracts, the letters, all the files Vivian had kept like a map to the truth. There were scans of bank transfers, copies of forged documents, and that one letter, my father's, the one that told the world how disposable my mother had been. Maya didn't flinch. She leafed through everything like a surgeon with an incision. Her brow furrowed, but there was a spark in her eyes, the exact kind of hunger I would later be grateful for. This is explosive, she said finally. But we have to be careful. They'll come for you hard. They'll try to bury you in court, in mud, in money. We need corroboration. We need witnesses who can stand up under pressure. That was when the real work began. Maya reached out, quietly and professionally, to a small team, a forensic accountant who smelled like cigarettes and truth, a legal aid lawyer who specialized in corporate malfeasance, and a camera woman who could make testimony feel real without theatrics. Jordan and I kept calling people, the families who'd been crushed, the small business owners who'd been cheated. Fear is contagious, but so is courage. Slowly, painfully, they agreed to talk. The first piece we released was surgical. Maya ran a short but brutal exposé. A carefully worded article that laid out Marcus Price's pattern of buying land through shadow companies, forcing families out with fines that then became valid through forged signatures. She published screenshots of emails, bank transfers, and a quote from two families who swore under the risk of retribution. The headline hit the internet like a brick: Price Empire. The untold story of a city's lost neighborhoods. The response was immediate. People read it. People forwarded it. The comment sections filled with old grievances, names I recognized, addresses from contracts in my folder. The municipal board called for a preliminary review. An online petition demanded investigations. The momentum felt dizzying and right. Marcus responded like a cornered animal. First came the denials, polished press releases full of words like unfounded and reckless allegations. He did his rehearsed smile on local television and blamed rogue employees for any misdeeds. Then came a smear campaign. Anonymous op-eds accused Jordan of fabricating evidence for personal vendettas. A rumor started that Vivian Hale was mentally unstable and had a penchant for exaggeration. Marcus's people brought up my name in 1,000 small ways, questions about my competence at work, whispers that I was emotionally fragile. It stung in a different way. They were trying to make my truth look like a temper tantrum. When the threats started, they were always indirect at first. A message scrawled on my car window. Protect what is yours or lose it. Someone smashed a rock through Jordan's apartment window. Our email accounts received fake subpoenas and intimidating legal speak demanding documents. The forensic accountant who'd helped Maya received a threatening cease and desist from a high-powered law firm. It all became very, very real. But the thing about coalition is that it grows when threatened. The more Marcus shoved and screamed, the more people stepped out of the shadows. A small community organizer I'd met months before sent a video of a group of elderly neighbors telling their stories on shaky phones. An old pastor produced a ledger of land deeds and testimony from parishioners who had been bought out under duress. Each voice was a nail hammered into Marcus's polished coffin. There were violent moments, too. One night, a man I'd met and whose testimony we'd planned to use called me sobbing. His house had been torched. The family was safe. A neighbor had noticed smoke and the father got everyone out in time, but the house was gone. He blamed Marcus's middlemen. I held the phone so tight my fingers hurt. Rage and grief and fury braided themselves into something that felt like purpose. We moved our files off hard drives and onto secure servers hidden in encrypted clouds. Jordan negotiated safe houses for witnesses who'd become targets. I began sleeping in different places, sometimes at Jordan's, sometimes on my mother's couch with the lamp left on all night. The danger was omnipresent, but so was the clarity. Marcus's power was not absolute if people refused to be silent. Then something changed in the way the city reacted. The mayor, who'd never returned my father's calls, finally made a statement calling for an independent audit. The police announced they had received several complaints and that detectives were reviewing the files. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't certain, but it was something. Underneath that small victory, we found a strange new fear in Marcus's eyes. He'd always believed he was invincible until the world turned its head and looked directly at him. Everything accelerated. The legal aid lawyer dug up an old case Marcus had used to intimidate a family into selling their property. That family agreed to testify. A bank whistleblower, someone who had worked in one of Marcus's shell companies, handed over documents showing funneling of money through third-party accounts to obscure acquisitions. We compiled it all into an evidence packet that would make even his most talented attorneys wince. On a cold morning in March, the Charlotte Ledger published the big piece. It was more than an article, it was an accusation with a body. It showed money trails, recorded phone calls, and sworn affidavits. Marcus's corporate board scrambled. Investors called for emergency meetings. The city called in state prosecutors. And then, criminal charges were filed. When the indictments dropped, the city watched like a collective breath had been held for months. Marcus was arraigned on charges that read like a criminal's resume. Fraud, coercion, conspiracy to defraud, and a list of counts related to corrupt business practices. He was arrested in a downtown courtroom, bland sapphire tie no longer hiding his shame. The image of him cuffed and trembling was surreal. He barked at cameras, demanded to be heard, pleaded his innocence. He was still dangerous, still lit with rage. But the first real crack had appeared in the world he'd built. In the immediate aftermath, there was relief, electric, ferocious relief, and even jubilation in parts of the city. People who had been pushed out of their homes returned to stand in the courthouse square and chant. A woman I'd met during my investigations hugged me so tight I nearly cried in public. For the first time in years, I felt like the country of our collective pain had finally been acknowledged. But Marcus was not finished. He retaliated with everything he had left. High-priced lawyers launched a counter-offensive. They subpoenaed every witness we'd lined up, filed injunctions to block publication of documents, and most devastatingly, they filed a defamation suit against Maya and the Ledger. They tried to drown our story in procedural floods, the kind of legal storms that bury truth under the weight of legal fees and endless hearings. When you have money, time becomes a weapon. They also targeted me personally. A slander campaign spread on social media. Photoshopped images of me with shady captions, innuendos about my motives, whispers that I'd fabricated letters to ruin a man whose work helped the city. My face showed up in comment threads with trolls coaching each other on how to ruin a woman's life. The harassment was loud enough to feel like a second indictment. There was a particularly venomous op-ed in a local magazine, anonymous at first, implying I wanted my father's position and his empire of power. The timing was strategic. It wasn't about truth. It was about distraction. Marcus's lawyers wanted to make a small, petty wrong. They wanted to redirect the story away from the families and onto me, onto my motives, onto anything other than the ledger of wrongs piling up against him. Jordan would not let the smear stand. He organized a press conference where he read aloud the money trails and the affidavits. He brought forward witnesses, one by one, courageous, shaking, but resolute. The camera lights felt hot on my face as each person told their truth. It was terrifying and beautiful and real. When the last witness finished, there was a hush so complete you could hear a pin drop. Then, slowly, people began to clap. The legal storm lasted months. Marcus used every delay tactic he could summon. He forced depositions so long and intricate you needed a doctoral degree to follow the threads. But each attempt to stall also revealed more of his network. In courtrooms, under oath, men who'd once bowed to him told their stories. A former executive testified that Marcus had a method for eliminating rivals, legal pressures, smear campaigns, and when necessary, arranged accidents. The word sent a shiver through the courtroom. Someone in the back cried out in stunned rage. The city watched, and the city began to shift. Investors pulled funds, banks audited related accounts, and several real estate deals Marcus had depended on collapsed. The foundation of his empire was cracking from within. Through it all, my mother watched with a thin, exhausted expression. There were nights when she'd sit at my kitchen table, hands folded, speaking rarely. Sometimes she'd say things that made me uncomfortable, like, "I never wanted you to bear my shame." But mostly, there was a quiet determination and armor of truth she'd carried secretly for decades. When she spoke in court, the strength in her voice surprised me. She described the first days after she left, the loneliness, the rebuilding, the fear. She told the judge about the threats, the deals that had to be signed, the charades she had to perform to stay safe. Her testimony was a kind of reclamation. And then, as the legal cases piled up, Marcus made a move that nearly toppled everything we'd built. He went after Jordan. They filed a lawsuit accusing him of hacking and fabricating documents. The suit was crafted to be a legal landmine. If Jordan's journalistic methods were tainted in court, the entire case could be dismissed. The charge was outrageous. Jordan was a journalist, not a hacker, but in the courtroom, accusations sound like evidence. They brought a forensic expert paid 6 figures to say Jordan's timestamps were inconsistent. It was theater, and for a moment I felt the stage tilt beneath us. But the community had learned something else as well. Marcus had created a long list of enemies, but from those enemies had emerged an unlikely solidarity. The whistleblower bank employee went public, the community organizer produced witnesses who'd seen the same forged signatures, and a former associate turned on Marcus and testified about the pattern of intimidation. Piece by piece, Jordan's name was cleared in public view. The judge, tired of theatrics, allowed the evidence to stand. The strategy rolled over like a wave that had run out of sand to hold it back. Then, one cold morning, with news vans lined up and protesters chanting outside the courthouse, a judge ruled that enough evidence existed for the state to proceed with trial. Marcus was remanded, bail denied. He was taken away into a police van with his head held high in defiance and, to many of us, terrified in his eyes. There was a strange moment of calm afterward. In the silence, I felt an enormous thing unspool inside of me. Victory was not total. The bruises emotional, reputational would take time to heal. But the bones of the city had been reset. The families whose land had been stolen got a restitution hearing scheduled. New oversight committees were created. Marcus's men scrambled for work. I stood in the courthouse steps with Jordan and my mother, the three of us a strange family unit woven together by weather and fire. People pressed into us, shaking hands, crying. A woman I'd met in the early stages hugged me like she'd hugged an old friend. "You didn't just help us," she said, voice tight. "You gave us back our names." But relief had a strange aftertaste. When the dust settled and the cameras left, there was still a hollow center in me where something had been torn away. I had wanted answers and I had them. I had wanted justice and it had been meted out as best the law could do. But sitting in my kitchen later that night, I found myself wondering about the smaller, meaner things. What were the souvenirs of a childhood stolen? Could anyone ever return those quiet, private moments to me? I visited Marcus in his cell once, because I wanted him to know the weight of what he did. It was an ugly visit. He begged not in a Shakespearean I'm sorry way, but in a pragmatic attempt to save himself. "I made choices," he said, voice low, "but I did it for you. For the family. You don't understand what it takes to build a legacy." I looked at him and felt nothing but sorrow and contempt. "Legacy built on fear is a rotten thing," I said. "You killed the only parts of yourself that mattered." He tried to reach the part of me that still loved him, expected it, perhaps. I told him he had already killed that part, long ago. When the trial finally came, it was long and messy. Lawyers raked through everything like scavengers. Marcus's defense was a practiced litany. Misinterpretation, disgruntled employees, political agendas. But the evidence was thick and the witnesses were steady. In the end, the jury convicted him on multiple counts. The sentence was severe enough to ensure he would not simply walk away. Hearing the verdict felt less like personal triumph and more like a formal recognition of the harm he had done. After the trial, the city breathed differently. Neighborhood associations formed to monitor redevelopment, activists stepped into local government, the families whose homes had been threatened took the first steps toward rebuilding. Where Marcus's name had once opened doors, it now shut them, his allies scattered like leaves in wind. For me, rebuilding was quieter. I didn't want the spotlight that followed the trial. I returned to my work, to my small rituals: a walk by the river, a stack of good books, dinners with friends who'd stuck by me. I tried, awkwardly, to relearn what trust felt like. I spent long evenings with my mother, listening to stories of her life as Vivian Hale, not the sanitized version Marcus had tried to erase, but the real one full of fear and courage and stubborn hope. We took trips to the neighborhoods Marcus had sold and helped in small ways, fundraisers, legal clinics, meetings with architects who could help rebuild. And then, one afternoon, when the spring light slanted just so across the living room, my mother and I sat across from each other and did something I had not expected. We made a list. Not of debts or grievances, but of small things. Places we would see together. Meals we would cook. People we would call. It felt like planting seeds in soil that had been poisoned for decades. There was a darker moment, too, one I'd rehearsed but had not imagined feeling so clearly. After everything, after the legal victories and the restitution hearings, my father reached out. The man who'd once ruled my childhood called and left a message so composed and hollow it made me laugh and sob at the same time. He asked, in a tone that felt rehearsed, if we could reconcile. He wanted to come to the house, to sit at our table, to rebuild family. For a while, I paced the floor with the phone, his words like a net. I thought of forgiveness and what it might mean. Could it be true forgiveness if the person asking had not shown remorse, only self-interest? My mother, who had borne so much, sat quietly in the doorway and said, softly, "You get to decide, Naomi." But remember, reconciliation is for the living, not for the erased. I chose at last. I wrote him a short note and left it on his inbox through his attorney. You already had your chance. You chose power over us. I am done trying to unroot the danger you planted. Do not come near my family again. It felt final and it felt right. Months later, life settled into a new rhythm. I watched my mother speak at a community center about founding shelters, about reclaiming space for those without voice. People lined up to thank her. Her name, once hidden in shame, became a banner for people who had been walking small and afraid for too long. Jordan and I stayed close. He published a long-form piece about the investigation, a piece that won awards and, much more importantly to me, opened dialogue in other cities about predatory redevelopment and corporate coercion. He always said it was never about his byline. It was about holding powerful people accountable. Sometimes the pain wakes me in the night. Sometimes a photograph will catch me off guard, a street we used to drive past where a row of houses once stood, and the loss will be fresh. But the grief is different now. It is not a quiet, solitary hunger. It is shared, named, and fought against. The last time I saw Marcus was for the closing statements at his civil suit. He looked older, smaller. I watched him stand when the bailiff called his name and then sit back down like a man who had been unmasked. I felt nothing resembling triumph. There was no joy in watching him diminished. Instead, there was relief. The city had its chance to rebuild. Vivian could walk its streets without fear. I had reclaimed a part of my life. On a quiet evening, my mother and I walked the neighborhoods that had once been taken. The air smelled of cut grass and paint. Children played where empty lots had once been. A woman we'd helped wave from a stoop, a simple gesture that felt like grace. My mother squeezed my hand, her braided fingers warm in mine, and said, "You found the courage that belonged to both of us." "What now?" I asked. She smiled, and something in her face was stubborn and bright. "Now we keep watch. Now we teach the next ones not to be afraid. Now we live." And I believed her. Not because the world had been made whole, because it hadn't, but because we were no longer quiet about the things that made us small. We would keep telling the stories of the people who had been erased, keep building shelters, keep teaching legal aid clinics, keep holding people in power accountable. The ruin of Marcus Price's empire did not return what was taken. Nothing could bring back the years, the nights, the times when I'd whispered into a pillow and tried not to wake my father's rage. But it did something else. It returned my name to me. It returned my mother to me. It gave me back a voice that I could no longer bury. If you ask me if I forgive him, forgive the man who pretended death and silenced a woman and built a city on the bones of families, I will say this: forgiveness is a path you might walk someday, but it is not the path I walked first. I chose truth. I chose accountability. I chose my family. If there is a lesson here, it is simple and harsh. Power often thrives in silence. If you see a wrong, speak it. If you are wronged, do not let the fear of retribution quiet your voice. There will be danger. There will be cost. But there will also be allies, and if you find them, the world will look very different. We kept on living, some days heavy with knots of memory, some days bright with small victories. But every morning I woke up with my mother beside me, and her presence was a kind of reclamation. The emptiness I'd carried for 27 years softened, then split open, and something like light spilled through. I learned to name the missing pieces and to live around them, not under them. One night, when the house was quiet and the city lights looked like a scatter of stars on black velvet, I wrote in my journal. They told me the dead stay buried. I dug them up. The dead can breathe again if we choose to look.